I just wanted to know, how big should my emergency fund be if we are dual income and plan to rent out our house? Should we have separate emergency funds for each? And I like this question because he's respecting your real estate and cash rules, Brian and Bo. So maybe you can speak to it and give him a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, so let's talk about what should your baseline emergency fund be. If you're a dual income household, and let's say that you have about the same income, there's a lot of folks who say, hey, we want to be a little bit more aggressive. We feel comfortable with 3 months of living expenses for our emergency fund. And that's appropriate because we're both income earners and we're both at about the same spot. That would be permissible and allowable. But say you're dual income earners, but one of you has a much higher income than the other. Well, I would argue that there's more risk inherent in your situation. So your emergency fund should likely be greater than 3 months. It should probably be somewhere closer to 4 or 5, maybe even 6 months of living expenses. Well, that's just in the normal circumstance. That's just in the normal environment. Whenever you start introducing real estate and you start thinking about having a rental property or having other assets and obligations, I think that also affects the emergency funding, the appropriate emergency fund levels. Agreed?
Yes, and that's why I think when you get into this level of complexity, it's not, look, the input of what you're trying to create is only going to be as good as all the scenarios you plan for. And that's why I know we throw it out there all the time, but it really is when you get into doing rental property and renting out a house that you used to live in, you're kind of starting a new business. Mm-hmm. I mean, and there's a lot of things that even when you're thinking about taking on a brand new job, that's a new endeavor and it's going to change your cash flow. It's going to change your house dynamics. Don't sleep on doing the 3D glasses plan. I mean, there's a reason we talk about this is that I want you to do some preparation and do some homework and figure out, hey, what's going to happen if this goes really well? That's the dream plan. If it goes how I think it will, that's the down-to-earth plan. And then what happens when literally this thing goes belly up and it's the doo-doo plan? Don't sleep on that. And that's why you might come to because it'll let you do a gut check on your personality and how you handle the emotional stuff as well. Because if y'all are two separate people from an emotional way you look at money, and you see the doo-doo plan and you like full on panic, we got to make sure that we boost up our cash to get us through this point here. But then you're married to a cowboy that's like, or you're in this relationship with somebody that's like, oh, it'll be all right. It'll be, and y'all are in completely different places. You've got to go ahead and have that communication plan. And what if you're in two different places and y'all's income, exactly what Bo was talking about, are in two different places on who can provide what? You got to reconcile those things, and why not do it now before things go south, either with the property or with the dynamics of if y'all are having a tough time in the relationship. It's better to go ahead and plan this stuff now while things are good versus letting this be the thing that creates a lot of stress and strife in your relationship.
I do think. Let me ask this: what are your thoughts on keeping those funds separate? Like, can you have all one emergency fund? Or if you have a rental property, should you think of that as a separate bucket of emergency fund?
Well, you have to be careful. Look, I don't want to, because there's a state, there's who owns what. Relationships are tough, and I didn't hear Carlos talk about marriage or whatever, so that's its own other dynamic in there as well. But I'm trying to be respectful of the fact that if this is a couple living together but not married, is that these things are strange dynamics.
No, I'm talking about the household emergency fund versus if you have a rental property. Like, should that all be combined into one emergency fund, or should you have a separate emergency fund?
No, I think you could treat it as a separate, because y'all are essentially have an entity together. But I do think what I thought you were alluding to, and I've had this conversation with somebody else recently, when you have two people making completely different incomes and they're living together and sharing a house, is that the money can become a power dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I always think that that's a weird thing, because relationships are already hard. So you just want to make sure that y'all have really good communication about the dynamics of money and emergency reserves and access and all the other stuff, because that's the hard parts that make the relationship, where it can get difficult, and if your communication's not good, it can fall apart.